Thank you, Acting Speaker, and I rise to make some comments on the Take Note motion, Royal Commission into Mental Health. And I do so acknowledging the importance of the 65 recommendations, and in the hope that this time the system will be fixed, because as a health professional, I actually have been on this journey for the last 30 years, and I want to take some time to share with you what it felt like as a health practitioner. And I'm going to begin by sharing with you that I urge you to consider the people who have fallen through the cracks, and I have in mind a friend, a health professional who worked with me as an Aboriginal health worker, who begged me to help her son, to help her find the treatment he needed as a very acute schizophrenic, and to share with you that I couldn't help her and I couldn't help her son, and he was found dead on the side of a road 3 days after he had died in the hot sun. And that family have struggled ever since, because that boy, that man, has a mother who died last year, a friend of mine who I, to this minute, can never forget the begging of how we could help him to get into a service. His sister and his brothers that suffer today as a result of that just horrific story. Now, 30 years ago when I started my training, I was had a placement in an institution, and it was very confronting. And the previous member for my electorate, Dr. Dennis Napthine, proudly was involved as the Community Services Minister in deinstitutionalising the system. And this is why I want to share this with you, because it was the right thing to do. As I said, when I was at Briley Institution in Warrnambool during the many weeks that we were stationed there, it was very confronting. And it did need to be fixed, and it is better to have community services. But the challenge was when we actually lost government. So we actually had a plan to deinstitutionalise the system, and that occurred. But what happened was, when we lost government, the Labor government did not continue with the plan of implementation. So that was in the early 2000s. We saw, and I was practising in community health, and that's the time where I talked to you about this gentleman whose mother begged me for help, and to this day I struggle with the fact that I couldn't help. I'm not mental health trained. Was a registered nurse, and my job was to help him access the system, and we couldn't find anything for him. And he's just one of many, many stories. But in 2006, the deficit was so great, and by God, there are so many people who can attest to this, you know, from the doctors that I talked to trying to get someone acutely suicidal some help. They were throwing their hands up saying, there's just nothing. There's just nothing. There's not enough resources. And this is out in the regions. So multiply the situation that we see today, because it was horrendously hard to get a bed. So in 2006, the government recognised the deficit and actually appointed, for the very first time, a Minister for Mental Health. If that's not recognition that there was a problem, I don't know what was. So what happened? What happened? Well, we've seen 18 years of the last 22 of a Labor government, and we sit here saying it's time to do something. No, it's been time to do something all along. And in 2010, 2014, we were in government, and I've got 2 pages here of the work that Mary Wooldridge did, and she was a passionate advocate for getting an improvement into the health system. She worked very hard, and in a very short time, 4 years, she did so much. Rewrote the 30-year-old Mental Health Act to put people with a mental illness and their families at the centre of decision-making. Invested in 450 new and replacement beds to meet demand, including delivering the largest ever boost for mental health services. And this included the Park Centre that the Liberals funded in Warrnambool. Now, let's remember, So anyone that tries to say we didn't do anything, we had 4 years and that's what we did. In 18 out of the last 22, I'm sorry, I personally, as a health professional, experienced on so many occasions the deficit and the need that I couldn't get for the families I was working with or the patients and the clients who needed help. So I speak on behalf of many health practitioners who have just thrown up their hands and said, what are we going to do? We can't continue like this. So I have sat in this place for 5 years, over 5 years now, and I have written to the Minister on so many occasions with people who have fallen through the cracks. There in fact were 14,000 people wanting to speak to the Minister. So when the Minister says, you know, the Royal Commission is the answer, yeah, well, we have got a lot now, but 2019 it was established. In November that year, in February that was established, in November that year there were 9 recommendations. Well, why didn't we start? Why did we use the Royal Commission as an excuse to do nothing? In 2016, this government set some targets for the suicide prevention framework that in 10 years they aimed to halve the suicide rate. Well, that's quite a few years ago, quite a long way down the track of that 10-year strategy, and it's increased. The suicide rate has increased. You know, where does it look like you've done anything? You can say you put some money in, but you've got to look at what was needed, and it's so far off the mark. Workforce readiness. I've participated in 2 inquiries in the last 5 years. Both of them identified workforce requirements, particularly in the region. So the workforce readiness recommendation 7 of the interim report in November 2019, it talks about it. But even in 2016, mental health workforce strategy developed by this government, access to mental health professionals is worse. 2016, now 2021, it's worse. So I don't understand the rationale. Now I say to you, have a think about what we're getting. Outcomes is what the member for Lowen discussed. Well, not long ago, July, year before last, I remember having this experience, and I share this with you because this is the challenge we've got. I was walking to the Parliament, past Parliament Station, where people at 8 o'clock in the morning just spew into the street from the underground station. People are trying to get past. It's just wall-to-wall people. This young girl, about 30 she was, had absolutely matted, filthy hair. Her cracked heels were bleeding, ingrained with black dirt. She had a night dress on, a very see-through night dress. It was July. She had nothing on her feet and she was screaming at the top of her lungs. She was screaming. She was having an episode. She was in a health crisis. And it amazed me as a nurse that we all I just didn't know what to do. It was my first experience, I think, in the city. It was probably actually a bit longer back than that. And I just thought, how is it that we're walking past? As a nurse, if that person had collapsed and had a cardiac arrest, I would have jumped to action, assessed the airways, breathing, circulation, started a few breaths and started compressions, and would have barked out a few orders, an ambulance would have arrived. What are we doing wrong? And it's those sorts of situations. During the pandemic, I saw this government go, oh yeah, let's sweep up all the homeless. They're homeless. Often there's mental health. Sometimes there's dual complexities with alcohol and drugs. Doesn't matter which comes first, but the system has broken down so badly that we don't see that girl as a sister, a daughter, and the family cannot help. Just like the mother who had no ability to help her son that I worked with, and so many more. She probably didn't have the wherewithal to make the decisions she needs to make. We haven't empowered the system to really help people that need it. We're leaving them absolutely desperate and the families unempowered, and that is totally unacceptable. Totally unacceptable. So I endorse the recommendations. I told the story of how we started this in the 90s, and how Dennis Napthine, my predecessor, should be proud of the fact that he de-institutionalised the system. How Labor have been in government for 18 of the last 22 years and have failed dismally. How we, in the 4 years we were in government, did so much, and how now Now the focus has to be on that girl that I mentioned, her family, and how we service them.